All right. Hello. Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining. So we are 2 minutes past our start time. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started on just some of the kind of agenda and structure of the meeting. So if people are still popping in, they won't miss any of the kind of meat of the information session. So I think some of you on here, if you are new and have not been a part of gaming before, welcome. My name is Lillian Lee. I am a program officer with the Gaming Mitigation Fund. There's a picture of me currently on the screen, but to just give a quick visual description, I am a white woman in her early 30s. In the picture, I have black and gray hair. Currently in real life, I have purple hair. And I do have glasses and a green sweater on today. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm just going to hand it over to my colleague, Greg, to do a quick introduction of himself as well.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm excited to see some familiar names here populating. As Lillian mentioned, my name is Greg Torales. I am part of the CIP team, so really excited to have Lillian's back today, just kind of facilitating more on the Q&A side. I coordinate the Carticulture program, and I use any pronouns. And in terms of my visual description, it's actually much like my photo. So just today, my hair is a little bit longer, so it's much more curlier, and I'm wearing a blue polo sweater. Thank you.
All right, so some structure for the questions for today's meeting, because we do encourage any questions you have about the topics, the program. We do ask that you submit questions using the Q&A feature when the presentation hits the related topic. So we have it broken into different sections, which I'll cover in the agenda coming up. But so for instance, if we're on eligibility, we do ask that you keep your questions to questions around eligibility, because if it's on a different topic, we may answer it when we come to that section. If you would just like to get your question in at the beginning, we will hold it when we get to that topic. So please feel free to submit it if you want to make sure that you don't forget it as we go. And we will be asking most of those questions read aloud. Greg will be helping to facilitate that, so he will be reading them aloud for the larger group. If there are a lot of questions and we can't answer them all verbally, some of them will be answered by typing in through that Q&A feature. And we will also have a portion at the end where we will be allowing people to vocally ask their questions, as well as submitting them through the Q&A feature. Also, just to note, as you probably saw when you joined, this is being recorded and will be available later on to view afterwards. We will stop the recording before we get to the section at the end where we encourage people to vocally ask questions, as we know some people are not comfortable vocalizing questions on a recorded session. So we will be stopping the recording before that. And then just again, as a general note, this presentation is a supplement to the guidelines and is not a substitute for the guidelines. So we do still encourage you to go to our webpage and read the full guidelines for the program, as well as watching this info session. I mentioned earlier, but just to reiterate for those who need it, we do have auto-generated captions enabled for this webinar, and you can turn them on by clicking the Show Captions icon on the Zoom menu bar at the bottom of the Zoom window. You can also, if you don't like, or if it's hard to follow the scrolling captions that are kind of the default when you click Show Captions, you can select View Full Transcript, and that will bring a kind of a pop-up on the right side of your screen where the chat usually is of the full transcript of those captions instead of the scrolling captions option. So it's kind of two different ways you can view the captions for today's session. All right, and then for our agenda for today, we will be going over just kind of the basics of the program in terms of eligibility, a kind of a subsection to eligibility, but that gets its own section because it's a little bit more complicated, are touring credentials. So this program, again, is designed to help organizations to present touring shows and artists to compete competitively with casinos and to kind of mitigate the strain of casinos on that industry. So we do define touring credentials and touring artists and shows very specifically. So we just kind of want to give a walkthrough of that to provide more clarity around that section specifically. We will then be doing an application walkthrough where we will go into SmartSimple and go through the actual application itself. Then a quick overview of the review process and timeline, and then our Q&A section at the end. All right, so we will just go ahead and jump right into eligibility. For this program, there are 3 main eligibility criteria. Applicants must be a performing arts center. Applicants must be a nonprofit, which can include cultural affiliates, or they must be municipally owned, and applicants must present touring shows or artists. And so what do each of these three mean in more depth? So first, performing arts center. When we say performing arts center, we have defined that as having a primary mission to promote access, diversity, or education in the arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences. Performing arts centers must also commit 50% or more of their operating expenses to the performing arts. And this can include things like overhead, staff salaries. So it's not just, the actual performing arts direct expenses themselves. If, you have 50% of your staff salaries are going towards the operating expenses of the performing arts, then that overhead does count towards those operating expenses. And we do have kind of more information on, if you're a multidisciplinary organization, how you calculate that in our FAQs and in our guidelines as well. And I'd also be happy to talk to anyone who is multidisciplinary, who is struggling with if they meet that 50% or more definition of operating expenses. And there is no requirement to own a venue for this program. So as long as you have a primary mission stated above and 50% or more of your operating expenses go towards the performing arts, you do not need to own a venue to be eligible for this program. In terms of legal structure, when we say fully cultural Massachusetts nonprofits, we mean a legally recognized 501c3 nonprofit in good standing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. When we say in good standing, that just means that you are incorporated and registered in the Secretary of the Commonwealth system, and you do the annual public charity filings every year. Nonprofit performing arts centers that are managed by a separate managing organization are also eligible. So this is, if you are a venue and you are a nonprofit art center, but you bring in someone and hire someone to do the management of all of your touring shows for you. So there's a separate company that kind of handles the management of booking the touring shows. You would still be eligible in this sense for this program. The managing entity must have a long-term contract, and by long-term, we mean 5 years, articulating those management responsibilities. Cultural affiliate performing arts centers. This is something that is specifically defined by Mass Cultural Council as a semi-independent performing arts center that operates under a non-cultural parent organization. So the most common example we have of this is a theater that operates at a university. In addition to the mission and performing arts expense requirements, so cultural affiliates still have to have a fully cultural mission and still have to have 50% or more of their expenses dedicated to the performing arts. They must also manage their own budget, have at least one full-time paid staff position dedicated solely to the Performing Arts Center, and have its own advisory board. So this means that, the theater at the college, for instance, has to manage their own budget. There has to be at least one staff member who all of their duties are tied to that theater and running and managing that theater, and have its own advisory board. So that is a board who meets to make decisions about kind of the mission and direction of the theater at the university. To continue with the example. For municipally owned performing arts centers, so these can be either managed by the municipality itself. So if you are a city who owns an auditorium and you do all of the booking and managing of that auditorium yourself, then the auditorium would be eligible under the first category. And if you are a city or town who owns an auditorium, but then hires it out to an eligible managing entity to do all the booking, kind of similar to how we talked about nonprofits with the managing entity, that would also be eligible. And eligible managing entities are defined as nonprofit or for-profit, but they must have a long-term, still that 5-year contract, lease, or deed, articulating those management responsibilities. The only ineligible managing entity types are those who operate under the direction of resort-style or slot parlor casinos, or who are casinos. So you can't, for instance, hire a casino to manage your auditorium and still be eligible for this program, because that is directly against the purpose of the program, which is to mitigate competition between casinos and performing arts centers. All right, and so we have come to the end of our eligibility section. So I will just throw it to Greg and see if we have any questions that have come up during that section.
Hi, Lily. No questions yet regarding eligibility.
Okay, great. And again, we will also have a portion at the end. So if you have any questions that you think of between now and then, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. Jumping right into touring credentials. So performing arts centers must present touring shows or artists to be eligible for this program. When we say touring show or artist at Mass Cultural Council, we define that as an independent entity being presented as a guest at the organization. So this means that it is someone you are bringing into your organization rather than a work you yourself as an organization are producing. The only time that a touring show or artist could be eligible for a produced piece is if they are a headliner with name recognition that is used as a marketing tool in that piece produced by the Performing Arts Center. So the example we kind of give there is if you are putting on a play and you say have Audra McDonald in the lead role. And so on all of your posters and marketing materials, you say spring play featuring Audra McDonald. That would be an example of someone who would qualify as a touring show or artist on a produced piece. For those touring show or artists to be defined as eligible, they have to meet two out of the three following sets of credentials. So they have to have a touring artist roster, a touring schedule, or touring artist representations. And we do need a link to two of these three, and we'll kind of go into more detail. So when we say an artist roster, we mean something like Polestar, Creative Ground, Bands in Town, Songkick, or some similar service. And there are so many, we couldn't possibly include all of the options. If you're ever unsure if something qualifies as an artist roster, we just ask that you reach out and ask the question. More often than not, the answer will be yes. And it's always better to ask rather than assume it won't work. So for our touring schedule, we've changed this definition a bit this year. We are just asking that artists have an established history of touring within the last 5 years. And when we say touring, we are defining that as travel to different towns, cities, states, or countries in a pre-planned route for a series of live performances. So if you know from past years, we had previously had a mandate that they had to tour within at least 3 states. We are taking that out because we know that there are some artists who are kind of New England-based touring artists who were disqualified from the criteria from that definition. And we wanted to kind of open it up and make it much more intentional in our definition of touring artist. And for the touring schedule, when you post a link to this in the application, it does not have to be like a printed flyer that lists all of the cities and towns they go to. It could be a Facebook page that lists their events. It could be the Polestar page that has their history of touring in the last 3 years. But it does have to be within the last 5 years. So if their only touring history comes from 10 years ago, unfortunately, they would not qualify under this credential, as we are asking for it to be within the last 5 years to show a recent history of touring. For touring artist representation, this is just asking that they have an agent or some form of management. Here are some examples of management agencies: CAA, CAMI, High Road Touring, Jensen Artists, IMG Artists, Paradigm Agency. These are not an exhaustive list. There are so many more agencies out there. And also, if it is a troupe of artists, so if it is a band with 4 members, or if it is a dance company with 10 members, you would just need to select one of the members of that band or of that dance troupe and provide the representation for that member. So you would not need to provide separate credentials for each of the members within the troupe. All right, so we have come to the end of touring credentials. So again, Greg, I will throw it to you. Are there any questions for this section?
No questions for this section.
All right, perfect. Moving right along to the application. This is the kind of login screen that you will see when you go to SmartSimple. When you log in, this will be what you see. This is the welcome screen. If for some reason you log into this welcome screen or you log into SmartSimple and you don't see the welcome insert name here, then you can always click on the Mass Cultural Council logo in the top left-hand corner or on the home button in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and that should take you directly to the welcome login screen. So from here, you will go to current opportunities, which should be the first option on the left side of your screen. That will show you all of the current available grant opportunities that your organization can apply to. So you can scroll down until you reach Gaming Mitigation Fund. You can see the deadline is February 1st, 2024. Click on Apply Now. So for the eligibility quiz for this organization, that's just, again, going over those kind of three main criteria we talked about. So is your organization a semi-independent program that operates under a parent organization? So this question is just asking, are you a cultural affiliate? It's a yes or no answer. Our test cultural organization does not happen to be a cultural affiliate. Is the applicant organization's primary mission to promote access, diversity, or education in the arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences? Our cultural organization does have that as their primary mission. Does the applicant organization commit 50% or more of their operating expenses to the performing arts? Our organization does. And then, does your organization present touring shows or artists? Yes, our organization does do that. I'm actually going to move my captions from the bottom of my screen because they are covering the Save Draft button that you would need to click to move to the next section. And so once you get here, a very important step is to click Check Eligibility, because that is what actually kind of submits your eligibility quiz to be screened. You can also save draft and come back to the eligibility quiz at any time. If you're unsure, you can always go back and reread the guidelines. A successful eligibility quiz will pop up with, you have successfully completed the quiz. Program staff will conduct a final eligibility review once you submit an application. And then you'll need to click Proceed in order to actually create a draft application. So if you do not click Proceed once you come to this point, an application will not be created for your organization. So it's very important to click that Proceed button. And then just to do some basic navigation of this screen. So this is what the draft application looks like for most of our applications at SmartSimple have this format. And so I just want to point out the notes feature on the left-hand side. We do encourage you to use that if you have any questions as you're filling out the application. It can be sometimes easier to just pop in here and create a new note, and this will come directly to my email. So this is basically the same thing as emailing me, except you don't have to leave the application to do it. You can just type out exactly what your question is in the moment, hit save, and I will receive that email and then respond to you as soon as I possibly can. And so that's a quick way to do a note to someone if you're having any kind of problems in the application itself. You can also at any time click on this application summary button, and that will generate a PDF version of the application. And it will generate the most up-to-date version of your application. So whatever the application looked like the last time you saved it, that will be what the PDF shows you. So you want to make sure that you're hitting Save Draft before you hit Application Summary, so you have the most up-to-date version of the application. And this is great if you want to send this to other people in your organization, or if you want to share it, or just like print it out and reread it before submitting, or just to have a PDF copy of your application. It's a very helpful tool for that. So to go over the application elements themselves, the first section is Applicant Information. And so this is basically, this information is mostly pulled from your organizational profile. So a lot of it is auto-populated. So you have the basics of legal name, physical address, mailing address, and parent organization. If you are not a cultural affiliate or municipally owned, your parent organization will likely read grant-seeking organizations. And so this is a field that will not be relevant for you unless you are a cultural affiliate or municipally owned. And I do want to stress for physical address and mailing address, Mass Cultural Council is a state agency, and in order to fill out the contract and disperse funds, a physical address is required. So if your mailing address is a PO box, that's fine, but the PO box can't also be listed in the physical address. They do need a location. And if you don't have a venue, again, this can be the location of your board member listed on your nonprofit. It can be your CEO's address. It can be whatever physical address you use, but a PO box is not acceptable as a physical address for the state's contract processing system. And that is, again, reiterated in the application, but I just wanted to point that out since we don't require a venue for this program. Some people can get confused about what physical address to use. Again, this will just show you what your legal status is. So again, nonprofit organization, a city or town government, I think is the coding we use in our system to denote a municipal organization. And then whoever the primary contact is, this is very important this is up to date because this is the person who will be getting all of the reminder emails. If any corrections are needed at the end of the process, this is the person who will contact. So it's very important that the primary contact is as up to date as possible. And the primary contact is also the only person at an organization who has access to edit this application. So a new section this year, because we have instituted a new electronic contracting system. Well, it's not a new system to us. We are utilizing the state's electronic contracting system, hopefully to eliminate some of the paperwork and make it a little easier so we're not mailing contracts to everyone. But for that, the state requires us to have 2 names. So the first is the contract authorized signatory, and this is the person at your organization who has the legal authority to sign contracts. And so we just need the first and last name, the phone, and the email address. And then they also require a secondary contact person called the contract authorized officer. This is the person at your organization who has the legal authority to attest that the above person can sign contracts on your organization's behalf. So the examples they give are a board member, president, chief executive officer, chief fiscal officer, etc. And then we have the questions of, does the Performing Arts Center have a separate managing entity? So this is, again, getting into, if the answer is yes, you will just need to provide the information of who is that managing entity. They'll become a co-applicant, and then you'll need to upload that contract, lease, or deed to show that there is a long-term 5-year agreement in place for that. And then if the entity makes the payments to the touring shows and artists, the entity will be the one who eventually receives the payment. And we'll kind of go over that in more detail later in a different section. We also have organization operating information. So for this grant, one of the ways we determine funding with the funding formula is looking at the amount of touring fees against your operating expenses, and also making sure 50% or more of your operating expenses go towards the performing arts. So that's why we ask for your most completed fiscal year and then the cash operating expenses from that most completed fiscal year. We do not need you to update an audit or to update tax documents at all. We are just asking because the cash operating expenses are part of funding determinations. And so we just want to make sure that it is the most recently completed fiscal year that you are reporting on. The next section is just asking, what are the different performing arts disciplines that you present live for audiences? And it can be one or all of these that your organization does. And then we do ask if your organization is only performing arts or if it is a multidisciplinary organization. If it is a multidisciplinary organization, this is where we ask you to verify that 50% or more of those expenses do go directly towards the performing arts. So this is why we ask for the cash operating expenses above, because if you are multidisciplinary, we also separately ask for the cash operating expenses for the performing arts. And then the grant auto calculates basically what that percentage is to just make sure that it is 50% or more. And we do ask you to submit a budget to show how you came to that calculation. And there is no budget format we impose upon you. It can be however your organization calculates that and however your organization does that budget. You can submit to us in a Word document, a PDF, in Excel, whatever format is easiest for you. And then we do just ask for a brief explanation of that budget, of how and why you arrived at that calculation. And in terms of navigation, you can click on, I encourage you to click on Save Draft anytime you come to the end of a section, just to make sure you don't lose any work if internet go out or if there's a crash of any kind. We all know how technology is. But to move from section to section, you can either click Next in the bottom right-hand corner, or you can directly click on the headings of the sections for navigation. For grant components, so funding amounts for this grant are determined primarily through a formula that considers the below factors, and these factors have equal weight. So it's the percent of performances impacted. And I know I'm reading from the screen, but I just want to make sure that I am getting it exactly as we have stated it so that I don't cause any confusion. So the percentage of performances impacted is the total number of eligible performances divided by the total number of all performances. So if you do 100 performances a year and 30 of them, excuse me, are eligible performances, then 30% of your performances are considered impacted and eligible because they compete most directly with casinos. And because that is the stated goal of this program, the formula does allocate more funds to performing arts centers that have a higher percentage of impacted performances because they are the most impacted by casinos. Then the second component used in that formula is total fees paid to touring shows or artists for eligible performances. So this formula allocates more funds to the performing arts center that spend more money, again, because those are the ones who are most impacted by competition with casinos. And to get to the total fees and the performances impacted, these are the data points we use. So the total number of all performances. So this is every live presentation of performing arts for an audience your organization does in a year. So if you are multidisciplinary, when we say performing arts, we do mean specifically things that fall under this list here. So it would be dance, opera, music, theater, musical theater, comedy, storytelling, things like that when we mean performing arts. And we do have that defined more in our FAQs as well. If you have questions, you can also email me if you're unsure if a performance would count as performing arts or other. But we do ask for the total number of all performances that fall under that live presentations of performing arts and that are presented by your organization or presented by a producer renting the organization's venue, because we know that's an important part of some organization's business model. So those performances can count towards the total number of all performances. And then to kind of break that down further, to determine the total number of performances by an eligible touring show or artist, we ask you to look at the list of total performances already defined and already laid out. And then of those, which ones meet the following criteria? They have to meet all three of the following criteria to be deemed an eligible performance. So they have to take place in Massachusetts. They have to be available to the general public by free or paid admissions. So for instance, performances only open to university students, K through 12 groups, or other limited audiences are not considered open to the general public. And they have to feature a touring show or artist. And then the other component is total fees paid to touring shows or artists. And so these are, you should only include fees paid directly to eligible touring shows or artists featured in eligible performances. So this is where we would not include performances presented by a producer renting the applicant's organization, because the producer renting the organization is the one paying the fees. It would not be an eligible performance as we've defined it. And in order to kind of make sure that the touring artists are hitting those 2 out of 3 criteria, we have developed an Excel template in order to be sure that in theory, it's easier to keep track of the total number of performances, the total number of eligible performances, and making sure that the number listed here matches that list on the Excel template. And the Excel template is also where you'll include those links to the touring credentials. So the artist representation, the history of touring, or the artist roster will be linked in the Excel template. And I'm going to stop sharing again for a moment while I pull up an example Excel template that I have. While I'm doing that, Greg, I'm going to pass it over to you to see if we have any questions.
Yeah, perfect timing. 2 just came in. So the first one states, last year there was a quote mitigating factor that was also considered so that no one had more than a 10% drop in their grant. Will that continue, or are you assuming we are all back up to full programming post-COVID at this point?
Yeah, great question. So that mitigating factor, we determined it was necessary to put that in once we had all of the data on the fees and saw the impacts of COVID. And so we haven't made a determination this year on if a mitigating factor is necessary, and we won't know that until we kind of have all the data in from all of the eligible applicants and we see what that impact looks like. And if there is still a really strong, obvious impact from COVID, that is absolutely something we will consider again, because our goal is to, again, help strengthen organizations, make them as competitive as possible in this marketplace. We don't want to contribute to the ongoing effects of the pandemic. So that's something that is absolutely something we're open to this year. We just don't know yet if it's necessary because we don't have the data.
Thank you, Lillian. And the second one reads, we are an art house movie theater which hosts touring performers, mostly stand-up comedians, but the vast majority of our programming is showing films. Does every film screening count as a performance or only live performances?
So film screenings would not count because it is not a live performance. But all of the work that you do, so if all of the live performances you do are those comedy performances, then that would be both your total and eligible performances, assuming they meet those 2 out of 3 touring credentials. So it would only be, those would be the only performances you would need to put on the list. You wouldn't need to include the film screenings.
Perfect. And we got 2 more. Should we read those now, or would you like to hold?
Yeah, let's go ahead and read them.
Perfect. All right, so the third one, hello, my organization has an education program that holds a few student concerts a year. All are free admission. Would it be necessary to add these concerts in the application along with our regular concerts?
So when you say student concerts, if they are only open to like one public school and you bring in that public school to see them and it's not open to the general public in any way, then that we would not consider that an eligible performance. You would still include it in your list of total performances because it is a live performance. It just wouldn't be counted towards your eligible performances. So here is an example of the Excel template that you'll download. We'd ask for event date, event time, event name, the number of performances per the event, because we know, for instance, spring play featuring headliner, that is one event. It occurs at various times. And within that one event, there may be 25 performances because, you know, you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 1, 2, 3, 4 for the weekend, add that up total, 25 performances over the run of the show. Is it open to the general public? Yes or no? Does it feature a touring show or artist? Yes or no? If the answer to either of these questions is no, then it is not considered an eligible performance and you do not need to complete the rest of the sections. If the answer to both of these is yes, then it is likely considered an eligible performance unless it is by a producer renting your facility. But if it is yes to both of these, then you would fill out the touring artist show and have those 2 credentials. So to just run through, let's say, also, this is only for calendar year 2022. So the dates of all of these should fall within 2022. So it's January 1 of 2022 to December 31 of 2022. And if you have, for instance, a show that runs from December to January, you would only count the performances in January for that production. And same if you have a concert series and you have a weekend of concerts that go from December to January, you would only count the January concerts for this list. So let's say we have a virtual New Year's concert, and that is something virtual programs are allowed as live performances as long as they happen at a scheduled date and time. So if it is a live streamed performance or if it is broadcast live, if it is a live stream performance on the 1st at 6 p.m., then we consider that a live performing arts show. If it is only available on demand or afterwards or stream at whatever point you want and it's pre-recorded, that is not considered a live performance. The number of performances for touring show artist name. So you would put touring band, and then you could put credential 1 would be artist roster. You would put a link directly to that artist roster. Touring credential 2 could be touring schedule. The same link can be used for multiple credentials because, for instance, Polestar does typically have the touring schedule of the artist listed on their website as well. So you can use the same link for multiple credentials, but you can't use the same credential twice. So if you can't use an artist roster and then a second artist roster, for instance. It has to be multiple, 2 of those 3 credentials. And are there any questions about specifically this Excel sheet or how to complete this Excel sheet?
Nothing yet is coming through specific to the Excel sheet just yet.
Great. And then kind of the other thing I wanted to show was we had that question about school performances. If there is a school performance, say the spring play has 25 performances that are open to the general public, but there are 2 performances that are specifically K through 12 education performances. So those are not considered open to the general public and should be listed separately. And then if you have a fall festival where you have multiple bands performing in the same festival, we would still consider that to be one performance because it is one event that happens one time. And you would only need to do credentials basically for one of the touring shows or artists there to show that it is an eligible performance. And you can put the fees for the full performance. So if you have a band that performed 10 times that day, you could put the total fees paid to them, but you would only need to put them on here once. Because overall, the totality of that festival, we consider one performance. All right, I think that's all I have to showcase for the Excel sheet. If there are no questions, then I will move back to the rest of the application. And so you'll just upload that Excel sheet into the upload template. You can drop file or you can click on browse file and it will open the list of all the potential files you could add. And again, just encouraging everyone to hit save draft when they come to the end of a section. The impact over time section is used to track impact over time and effectively advocate to maintain the Gaming Mitigation Fund. However, the answers to these questions do not impact grant amounts. They do not impact whether or not you will be funded. They are purely for data gathering and advocacy purposes because this is a program written into the Massachusetts general legislation and is like legislated by the state that we run. There is a heavier advocacy and data gathering requirement for it than for some other programs. That's also why the final report for this program is the application for the following year. So for instance, if you were granted a fiscal 23 Gaming Mitigation Fund grant, your final report is this fiscal 24 application because we have this impact over time section built into the report. And so it's just the total earned revenue from all of your performances, total earned revenue from performances in Massachusetts by eligible touring shows or artists. So again, you could use the list determined in the previous section to get this number. Total ticket revenue from performances in Massachusetts by eligible touring shows or artists. That's kind of one more detailed step looking at that already established list. And then we just want to know how the operation of resort-style casinos has impacted your organization, specifically in terms of securing touring shows and artists. But if it goes beyond that, that's also something we would really like to know. And we do ask specifically about financial impact and other impacts as well. And you can upload any files you want that kind of showcase if you already have them. You do not need to feel any pressure to create something for us for this program. Again, this is for advocacy and data gathering purposes and does not impact your grant amount or whether or not you are funded. And the last one is just the acknowledgement, certifying that everything is accurate to the best of your knowledge. You'll meet all of the requirements as listed in the guidelines, etc. And then you can submit whenever you're done or save draft and come back to it at any point. So that is the application walkthrough. Do we have any other questions about that?
We have not about that specifically, but one I think we could possibly ask now, just a simple one. What is the total award amount available to be dispersed?
We don't have that number yet. So that number, it's 2% of the funds we receive from the overall casino revenue comes to Mass Cultural Council. Of that 2%, I believe it's 1.75% gets specifically allocated towards the Gaming Mitigation Fund. And so we don't yet have the final numbers for the year. It has remained pretty consistent over the past years of being between 3.5 million and 3.7 million. We don't anticipate it being any less than that. but we do not have the final numbers yet. For the review process, it is an internal staff review process. So staff will review to confirm eligibility. Any ineligible applicants are notified and removed from the pool, and then eligible applicants are reviewed to confirm formula components are accurate. If there are any corrections needed, there will be a chance staff will reach out and give you typically a 1 to 2 week deadline to resubmit and correct that application. So if you make a mistake, you will have a chance to correct it. Or if there are questions, there will be a chance to ask them. So don't get too caught up in the numbers if you're unsure of things. Always feel free to ask us, but there will also be a chance for correction if necessary. Once we have gotten back all of those corrected applications, everything will be moved into that formula consideration. And again, for that formula, we look at 2 factors: the percent of performances impacted and those total fees paid to touring shows and artists. And we kind of went over that a little bit already. And just as a caveat reminder, not all eligible applicants are guaranteed funding. This is true of all of our grant programs. We do try to fund as many eligible applicants as possible every year. So the use of grant funds, here are the specific uses for which the funds must be spent on. So they can be payments to the show or artist, including bonuses and percentages for in-person and or virtual performances. So virtual performances, only the payments to the show and artists themselves, including bonuses and percentages, count for those virtual performances. Housing costs for the touring show and artists for in-person performances only, and then travel costs for the show and artists for those in-person performances only. So these are the 3 kind of categories that funds must be spent on, and these are the only 3 categories for which funds can be spent on. Does that answer the question, Greg, or was there more detail?
Yeah, most of it. Yeah, I think there was one caveat there. May we include rental expenses for musical instruments and related equipment for the production?
So that does not fall under any of these 3 categories.
Okay. Yep, then that was it.
So the timeline for the program, so the deadline is February 1st. The application opened today, so it is now available. You can go and look at it. You can begin filling it out. And the deadline is February 1st, and that is by 11:59 p.m. So not 5 p.m. end of day, it is by 11:59 p.m. Eastern time, with the note that staff typically only is available to answer questions until 5 p.m. by phone. Usually we do stay later to answer questions via email, but typically the cutoff point for that is 8 p.m. So if you are continuing to work on the application beyond that, you will not have staff help past a certain point in the day. We estimate currently that email award notifications will be sent out in March of 2024. And we also estimate that contracts will begin to be mailed, or now that we're doing the e-contracts, emailed to grantees in March of 2024. Again, these are estimates. That timeline may shift based on the volume of awards to give out. And June 30th is the date by which the grant funds must be spent. However, they can be spent retroactively. So our calendar year, not our calendar year, our fiscal year as a state agency is July 1st to June 30th. And so these grant funds typically have to be spent within that fiscal year. However, we can look back retroactively. So any of those 3 things, those fees paid to touring shows or artists prior to July 1st of 2023 can also be included. And then, as I said, the final report for this application, for this grant period, is the application for the next round. And so we don't have a date for that yet because it won't be until fall of 2024 when the next round of funding becomes available. And that is it. Are there any final questions anyone has?
None have come in so far. You've addressed everything that's been asked.
All right. And just to remind people, we do have a frequently asked questions linked from the guidelines on our website. We will also be hosting weekly office hours. So those begin next week, and you can go to our agency dates webpage to sign up for those office hours. Those are informal kind of small group Q&A sessions. You can also always email me or call me or set up a one-on-one meeting with me if you have more specific questions to your organization.
All right, Lillian, we have 2 that just came in. The first is, should the impact over time questions be about fiscal 22 or fiscal 23?
That is a great question. It is whatever your most recently completed fiscal year is.
Okay. Next, we have, so only performances taking place before June 30th, 2024 are eligible, correct?
Eligible in what way? So maybe I should clarify. So for this program, when you're reporting on performances in the application, we are only looking at calendar year 2022. When we're talking about how you can spend the funds, that can be on performances. The funds have to be spent by June 30th. The performance does not have to take place for that time. If you pay an artist in June of this year for a performance taking place in 3 years, that's fine because you're still spending the money before June 30th for an eligible use. So the performance itself doesn't have to take place because we know that booking for these things can sometimes be years out. As long as the fees are spent in the timeline for those eligible uses, the performance doesn't have to take place in that timeline.
And I think that what you just addressed, Lillian, also answers or addresses this next question, which was very similar. So what if payment has been made to the artist or for travel by June 30th, but the performance will take place later in the summer? So I feel like you've already addressed that.
Yeah, same thing. That's why we allow those retroactively to be applied, because we know that, again, for presented works specifically, booking happens long before the performance happens. So that's why we say, yes, it can be retroactively applied to that. So that's perfectly fine.
Awesome. Okay, one more. For most recently completed fiscal year, do you care about whether the numbers are audited or the 990 has been filed for?
Yes. So when we say most recently completed fiscal year, we do ask that it is the most recently completed fiscal year for which you have filed taxes or received an audit. Yes, thank you. That is an important clarification.
Perfect. And so far, that were all of the questions that came in.
Thank you so much for your time today. And again, this will be recorded and put online, and you can always reach out to me if you have any questions.